of northern England. Parts of Scotland seeing down to -5 or -6, but a little milder under that cloud and rain across the south. Rain, cloud, sleet and hill snow likely to spread its way slowly south and eastwards as we go through the day on Monday. This again turning to snow, particularly across parts of Wales and Northern England. However, for Northern Ireland, Northern England and parts of Scotland, definitely seeing a much brighter day, and perhaps just a touch milder too. Temperatures still widely in the low single figures, but perhaps just a touch milder across the very far southwest.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Who is it?
We're here for the show.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquia, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new t-shirt.
It's your new t-shirt. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan, Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks, the admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel. Good morning and welcome to the Camilla Tominey Show. It's freezing cold outside, so don't go anywhere for the next 90 minutes because we've got another bumper show for you lined up as usual. As temperatures plummet, can the NHS handle another winter crisis? I'll be quizzing the Health Minister, Maria Caulfield, about that. I'll also be joined by Tory big beast David Davis. We'll be discussing the possible sale of my newspaper, The Telegraph. There's been a row brewing after it emerged that a fund backed by the United Arab Emirates could be trying to buy it. I'm also going to be joined by Rosie Duffield for an exclusive interview where she discusses the plans to deselect her from the Labour Party. That will be very interesting. Stay tuned for that. She's being taken on by those in the party who don't agree with her stance on trans issues. They've accused her of anti-Semitism, so she'll be discussing and revealing all a little later. Since the start of the Israel-Hamas truce last week, 115 Israeli hostages have been released from Gaza, but the Israeli government say 135 captives still remain. With fighting having resumed between Israel and Hamas, it doesn't look like any will be released anytime soon. I'm going to be speaking to the brother of one of those who is still trapped in Gaza. And another week, another royal row. We'll get the lowdown on all of the fallout from the release of Omid Scobie's book, Endgame. Looking forward to all of that. Don't go anywhere. Make a cup of tea. Do not go outdoors. It's far too cold. Stick with me while I wear this red dress. Probably the tightest dress I've ever tried to put on. Hopefully I'll still be comfortable by the end of the 90 minutes. Let's bring Giles Kenningham into the conversation now. He's a former Director of Communications at 10 Downing Street and the host of a podcast called Hacks and Flacks, which is a lot of fun. Giles, lovely to see you this morning.
Good to see you.
Now, I had to double-take when I saw the front page of the Sunday Telegraph. Starmer piles praise on Thatcher to woo the right. And he's written an op-ed for the newspaper, which, let's be honest, it's no secret, it's right-leaning. And this op-ed basically says, you know, voters have been betrayed on Brexit and immigration. I stand ready to deliver. So Starmer channeling his inner Maggie. Is this credible, Giles? What's your reaction to this?
I mean, look, let's see it for what it is. It is naked, transparent move to park his tanks on Tory lawn, on the Tory lawn. I think we've got to see the backdrop of this. There is a spectre of a potential general election in May. Labour haven't got many policies they've rolled out. So they're trying to do that pitch to Middle England. Do I think it's going to move the dial? No. I think what's interesting about all of this is I do not think there's going to be a general election in May, but I think the Tories have done it as a trap for Labour to try and force them to take some policy positions because clearly Starmer's stance was like, I'll do nothing, I'll sail under the radar and I'll be none of the above. And so I will get into power. But I don't think Labour are now going, shit, do we need to get these policies out the door really, really quickly? And they haven't got them ready, they're not bomb-proof, so therefore you've got them trying to make these sort of, you know, pitches to different parts of the electorate.
I'm just going to make a little apology for your fruity language there, Giles, but no worries. It's a Sunday morning. We're all getting excited because an election is imminent. The other thing about Starmer, of course, is this idea that he seems to have decided to just go fully centrist, if not a little bit blue Labour. He doesn't seem to care about some of the hard left elements of his party. I mean, the idea of channeling Thatcher isn't going to go down very well with them. I mean, they think that Thatcher's like the most evil figure of the 20th century. And you say it's not going to move the dial, but aren't the Tories worried that there is no jeopardy with Starmer as there was with Corbyn? You know, people on the streets of Britain probably agree with that op-ed. Nothing seems to be working. You know, we're all going to hell in a handcart. And maybe they are thinking, they're not thinking like Blair, hooray, we want Tony in the same way, but they are thinking, yeah, you know, Starmer, how bad could it be?
I think so, but I think like neither the Tories or the Labour have actually set up what the big idea is, what the big vision is. And I think for Starmer there has to be some substantive policies. Yes, he's making the right noises. Yes, he's continuing to detoxify the Labour Party. And it's interesting he talks about Thatcher and entrepreneurialism because for Labour, their weakest sort of policy is the economy. They're still not trusted on that, so he's doing a lot to try and detoxify. But at the end of the day, we still haven't seen any substantive policies from them on this matter.
From your experience working in Number 10, this whole kind of silent assassin routine, just soundbite over substance, they don't need to say anything until the manifesto, just let the Tories hang themselves. That's not a bad strategy, is it? Because they're still ahead 20 points in the polls.
But midterm polls are soft. And remember, I think Starmer's got to get a bigger swing than Blair got in 97. So, you know, so I actually think the most likely outcome, probably at the moment, looking at the polls, is going to be a Lib coalition rather than Labour majority. Goodness. And bear in mind, he's got a hope.
Will the Libs go into coalition again? I mean, they wouldn't go into coalition with the Tories, but maybe they would Labour.
it feels like they're much more ideologically left-leaning and much more sort of aligned with
some Lib Dems seem to be more left-wing than Keir Starmer, to be fair. Let's talk about more cash for Kigali now. The Sunday Times front page. Rwanda's extra 15 million to seal migration. I appreciate 15 million is a lot of quid to anybody watching or listening to this. In fact, to either of us, I wouldn't mind 15 million quid. But it's not a lot of money in the scheme of things. However, won't voters just think, why are you throwing more money at this thing? You know, it's not working. These flights aren't going to take off. Should they just ditch the Rwanda policy, Giles?
I don't think they can. This has become the Tories' new Europe. It's the big political headache for Sunak, and some of this is about party management, but you've seen lots of reports in the papers today saying it's existential for Sunak.
Yes.
Lots of MPs are putting in letters of no confidence in. I think cleverly got off to a bit of a shaky start with the Times interview where he said Rwanda wasn't essentially a #1 policy for him in the Home Office, which upset a lot of the Tory right wing.
It's not the be-all and end-all, he said.
So I think, they're going to have to find a way to cut through this. And clearly, the whole issue of the boats, immigration, uncontrolled immigration is still coming up in focus groups. I mean, interestingly, Starmer mentions it in his op-ed today.
Yes.
So you see they've got to try and get a handle on this.
Labour have got the answers on immigration, yet we're yet to hear any of them. You used to work for David Cameron. I'm intrigued to know what you think Cameron, as Foreign Secretary, might make of the Rwanda plan, because it doesn't seem to be the kind of thing that he would support.
I think he said that unless you've got a better idea, then don't snipe from the sidelines. I think, you know, when he was
not an overwhelming endorsement.
When he was in government, he talked about getting immigration down to the tens of thousands, which we didn't succeed with. I think, you know, ostensibly he wouldn't have come back into the fold if he didn't support this. And I think he's been, you know, pretty sort of vocal and straightforward on it.
Isn't there a problem with him coming back into the fold that he makes Rishi Sunak look slightly less prime ministerial? I mean, he is a good and competent statesman, isn't he, Cameron? He's done this op-ed in The Sun on Sunday. He said, only unity, strength and resilience will calm our dangerous world. I mean, that's the sort of rhetoric that the Prime Minister should be coming out with, really.
I mean, I think ultimately he is an asset for Sunak. When Cameron was Prime Minister, he had Haig as the Foreign Secretary, who would sit round for all those big decisions. And often, you know, many problems in politics come full circles. To have someone who's been there, seen it, done it, who can offer you the sage advice is really useful. And bear in mind also, Haig wasn't jockeying for position. He didn't want to become Prime Minister.
Yes.
I don't think Cameron wants to become Prime Minister. He's been there and done that. I suppose the question for the Tories is, does just by the very fact that he is a very good media performer, he looks Prime Minister or he is good on the world stage, does he start to overshadow Sunak? And the question for them will be, how much do they use him during a general election campaign?
But he's a great campaigner, though.
Yeah, I suspect they will use him quite a lot, yeah.
I mean, OK, we can say that he didn't campaign adequately on Brexit and Remain, because obviously Leave won. And in many respects, some of his closest allies, I think, are still frustrated that he walked away in 2016. But at the same time, I think they probably will put him on the campaign trail. And again, he may overshadow his boss, so to speak. I mean, physically, there's a discrepancy there which doesn't play very well in photographs.
That picture which got a lot of publicity, wasn't it? Him walking alongside Sunak and Cleverly, and he was the tallest. And in the middle, you know, which everyone said, like, made him look more prime ministerial.
Yeah, I thought so. But they just need to get the optics right on it, presumably. He's also made the point that we can't forget the situation in Ukraine, which I think is valid.
I think also interesting there, he talks about strengthening ties with the US, which is interesting in the backdrop of, obviously, we've had quite a rocky relationship under Biden. Obviously, Johnson didn't get on with him very well. There was no love lost there. You know, do we still have that special relationship? But he talks it up, so he's going there. And also interesting, talks about the importance of NATO.
Although some might find that a bit ironic, because he was accused of cozying up too much to Barack Obama, who's obviously a Democrat president, rather than maintaining ties with the Republicans. I mean, the Tories should have good relationship with the Republican movement.
With both.
That seems to have eviscerated over the course of the last few years. Having said that, so perhaps as the Republican Party...
I think they're going to have to, with the spectre of a Trump, potentially of a Trump presidency coming in.
But I know, but I mean, Cameron going to be comfortable going out and meeting Trump? He'll have to do that if the time comes that this guy is re-elected. It could be interesting.
Yeah, I think he's pragmatic, so...
Right, no, fair enough. Let's talk about the Telegraph, as we're calling it, shakedown. I love what we've done there. My colleague Janet Daly has come out against the idea of the UAE having ownership of the newspaper by paying back this loan that the Barclay brothers have to Lloyds Bank. The headline of her piece is, "This paper's proposed takeover by a state must not be allowed to happen." And I'm just intrigued with your former number 10 hat on, Giles. I mean, do you think that Rishi Sunak and indeed Culture Secretary Lucy Fraser are going to let the Telegraph of all newspapers fall into the hands of a foreign state that doesn't seem to have that much respect for freedom of the press?
Yeah, I mean, ostensibly you think it would be a crazy move to let another government own a paper. There are many other rival bids which look eminently sensible to own the paper. I think we've got to be very careful in this country what we allow other states to own. And we've seen it with football clubs. You know, it's the ultimate soft power tool. You know, whether it's only the Saudis owning Newcastle United. Quite controversial. So yes, do I think they should intervene? Yes, do I think a foreign state should own it? No. Very interesting that you, yourself, and a couple of the columnists have come out and spoken out against it. And it feels like sentiment is certainly moving against this bid.
Well, we live in hope. Let's finally talk about the story that's dominated the headlines all week, Harry and Meghan. So the latest from the Sunday Times, which is also covered on the front of the Mail on Sunday, is this idea that the Duke of Westminster, Hugh Grosvenor, who's a very good friend of both William and Harry, he's getting married in Chester in the summer. It's the society wedding, not just of the year, but the century, because obviously the Duke of Westminster's one of the country's richest men. And he's decided that he'll invite William, but not Harry. I mean, how do you think this whole scandal, if you like, is played out for both the royals and indeed the Sussexes, Giles?
I mean, it almost feels like for Harry and Meghan, they're fighting a war against themselves because the royal family aren't really reacting to a lot of this. I think, essentially, it's the law of diminishing returns for Harry and Meghan. They can have a go once on this. They keep having a go. I think people are going to stop listening. Interestingly, I don't think they poll very well in the UK, so from a PR perspective, can they come back here? And where do they go in the US? They've been dumped by Spotify over that deal. So you sort of see this kind of move to try and become relevant, and the way they've become relevant is becoming shriller and shriller and shriller. I don't think it works.
No, also, I'm wondering whether they've got anything left to say now. You know, the so-called alleged royal racists who questioned Archie's skin tone or a future baby's skin tone have been outed as the King and the Princess of Wales, and yet at the same time most people don't think that it was racist to suggest it in the first place. But secondly, it takes the sting out of any book that Meghan was planning to write or any further revelations. They're sort of, I'm kind of looking at them thinking, what more do you now have to say?
Yeah, they're just looking very bitter instead of actually just standing back and moving on with their lives.
Giles Kenningham, thank you very much for joining me this morning. Great analysis of the papers. Well, as I say, we've got a very, very busy show planned for you. We're going to be speaking to David Davis. I'm also going to be speaking to Rosie Duffield, so don't go anywhere. The Health Minister, Maria Caulfield, also up in just a minute. But first, here's the weather.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Good morning, welcome to your latest GB News weather. I'm Ellie Glazier. It's a cold and frosty start this morning across the northern half of the UK. However, a bit of a cloudier picture across the southern half. Showers continue to push in from the west, these turning to snow over the high ground of Wales, parts of the Pennines as well, perhaps seeing up to 10 centimetres of snow, and some icy conditions expected through this morning. Further north though, under those clear skies across Scotland, plenty of sunshine around through this afternoon, but feeling cold in that sunshine. Some spots perhaps staying below freezing. However, further south under that cloud and rain, a much milder day, around 8 to 10 degrees, but some strong winds from the southwest, perhaps taking a notch off those temperatures. Those strong winds in the southwest will bring another band of rain, slowly tracking its way north and eastwards through Sunday night and into Monday morning, bringing some heavy rainfall across the southern half of the UK to start the new working week. There's likely to turn to snow across parts of Wales and northwest England again, and another cold night across parts of northern England. Parts of Scotland seeing down to -5 or -6, but a little milder under that cloud and rain across the south. Rain, cloud, sleet and hill snow likely to spread its way slowly south and eastwards as we go through the day on Monday. This again turning to snow, particularly across parts of Wales and northern England. However, for Northern Ireland, Northern England and parts of Scotland, definitely seeing a much brighter day, and perhaps just a touch milder too. Temperatures still widely in the low single figures, but perhaps just a touch milder across the very far southwest.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. We're just waiting for Maria Caulfield, the Health Minister, to be ready to speak to me down the line. I'm going to bring Giles Kenningham back into the conversation now. I mean, obviously, health is a massive issue. It always polls very highly when you ask the electorate what's most important to you. Is it going to be an election-defining issue like it was in previous years? Because, obviously, cost of living crisis, it's the economy stupid, as the Clintonian once said. But equally, immigration's a massive issue, isn't it?
I mean, Labour will want to make it about the NHS because they poll so well on it. The
Yes.
Tories will be looking to neutralise the issue. I suspect it will be part of it, but immigration, I think, seems to be the #1 political issue, and cost of living. So.
Yeah, and also, I think, with regard to the NHS, I mean, maybe is there a bit of fatigue in talking about the NHS because we spent so much time talking about it during the pandemic?
And you've now got the COVID inquiry, which has been, going into minute detail.
Maria Caulfield's with me now. Thank you very much, Giles. Minister, thank you very much for joining me this morning. Nice to see you. Look, I've seen the government handout for today. It's announcing that you want to do things in a quicker, more efficient and slicker way. I'm sure you're going to point to the idea of you having recruited 50,000 more nurses. There are 5 million more GP appointments. But as mental health and indeed women's health strategy lead in the Department of Health, we have got a problem, haven't we, with the mental health cover offered by the NHS. For instance, mental health nurses are down 467 since 2010. So are the government being a bit selective with some of the figures that they're releasing to the press this morning? She's frozen. No, we'll try and get Maria Caulfield back. Hopefully I won't have to repeat that whole question. I'll bring Giles back into the conversation. I mean, it's difficult, this, isn't it? Because everybody associates that Boris Johnson promising, wasn't it 40,000 new nurses, 40 new hospitals and all the rest of it? And people are waiting on lists. You know, this is an astonishing statistic, which I'll put to the Minister if we can get her, that people who are told that they need to urgently be referred by their GP, they're meant to be seen within a target of, I think it is, 85% of people should be seen within 2 months. Actually, that target's been completely missed for successive months. This waiting list that Rishi Sunak talks about cutting is going to top 7.8 million, we think, next year. Yeah. So, I mean, where's the performance from the government?
You've got to remember that you've got the backdrop of COVID, which I think has significantly impacted on waiting lists and the way the NHS operates. But you're right, it is a political hot potato for the Tories. And I remember every time during the 2015 election we brought up the issue and we highlighted their record in Wales, where of course they're in power. Our poll ratings went down. So it wasn't even like we could have an honest conversation on it. So, yes, it's a very, very divisive issue.
Do you reckon Rishi Sunak's whole "my dad was a GP and my mum's a pharmacist" shtick makes any impact on the electorate? I mean, how do you think they view him? Do they think that he's somebody who understands the pressures that the NHS is under, or do they just see him as somebody quite rich who probably has private health?
I think that's the question,
that's the trouble, right?
Do people feel that emotional connection? Do they think he has empathy? You know, obviously he's very well off. Do they feel like he can connect? And obviously that's part of his backstory, saying, look, I came from quite humble beginnings and I worked my way up. I think generally the electorate, we found with David Cameron, who came from, a very privileged background, he didn't try and run away from it. They're much more interested in, like, this is where I've come from, but where do I want to get to? Where are we going as a country? So that would be the question mark.
But the interesting thing about Cameron, I was reflecting on this when he was appointed as Foreign Secretary. Actually, he had a fundamental understanding of the NHS because of his late son, Ivan, who had profound disabilities at birth. Also, Cameron's late father was disabled and wheelchair-bound. You know, he was, of course, Eton educated and very privileged, but there was a sense to which he did understand, actually, how the other half lived because of this, difficulty that he had with his eldest child. So I don't know whether Rishi Sunak is making the same connection because he's not doing enough of the personal. I mean, isn't that also a problem? Like, people are looking at this Prime Minister. I get that his wife, Akshata, did the speech at conference, which was unexpected, but aren't people looking at them saying, look, who are you really? And yet he seems to be reluctant to do the private stuff because he thinks it's good enough to be working hard behind the scenes. Is that good enough?
Well, I think he's going to have to take more risks. You know, we've got less than 12 months to an election now. You're going to have to see him doing more of those town hall events, more of those sort of events where he's rolling up his streets, getting out and about, talking to the public.
No. Do we have to see politicians roll up their sleeves?
Gives you more opportunity to grill them, but go out and do exactly, press the flesh. Because I think a lot of people don't really know him. He's only been in power for a year, and I think there is, to some extent, some of that emotional disconnect going on.
But then also, isn't that the criticism of Starmer, that you look at him and you're like, who is this guy? OK, he's a former lawyer, former head of the Director for Public Prosecutions, big job, but then there's something a bit robotic about them both. Yeah. I mean, this is the absence of a kind of characterful politician like Boris.
Ironically, they're quite similar to some extent. With Boris, there's a very clear contrast. They're both quite dry, technocratic politicians who don't really set the world on fire. And so, for some extent, it would have been easier for Labour if Johnson had been there in terms of a direct contrast of two characters.
But then at the same time, does that entice people to come out and vote? You know, we saw at the by-elections a historically low turnout. You made the point about would a Lib coalition be more likely than a Lab majority? Not least because in the by-elections they didn't increase their vote share at all. They just capitalised on the Tories not really turning out to vote.
This is what you feel like. You don't feel like Starmer is riding that wave of popular optimism that Blair was in '97, and yet Starmer needs a bigger swing than Blair got, which is why I think it is still quite likely that he won't necessarily get a majority. He's got a huge electoral mountain to climb. There may well be this Lab-Lib coalition. And I don't think it is good enough for him just to sort of say, I'm none of the above. We've got to actually see, like, what's the big picture, what's the big idea, in a world where, let's face it, we are going through periods of probably unprecedented volatility and uncertainty, both economically but also on the foreign stage.
Yeah, thank you very much for the jars. Thank you. I don't think we're going to get Maria Caulfield because we've had a problem with her line, unfortunately. To be honest, I do want to say that we do ask every week for the government to give us the Minister on the round. The Health Secretary, Victoria Atkins, didn't do us last time, hasn't done us this time. Not quite sure why the government don't want the Health Secretary to address GB viewers and indeed listeners, but there you have it. Somebody who does want to address you and will discuss the matters that are really important to you as the GB audience is, of course, my GB News colleague, Michael Portillo. Michael, tell us what you've got coming up on your show at 11.
Good morning, Camilla. I'm going to be talking to the family of a 21-year-old male hostage. The family is in Israel. I'll be asking them how they feel now that rather fewer than half of the hostages who were taken on October the 7th have been released. What are their feelings now? We're going to have an ethical discussion on the Elgin marbles, if that's what you choose to call them. Some people call them the Parthenon marbles. The question is, where should they be, London or Athens, and really why? There's a new movie. Ridley Scott has produced a movie on Napoleon. I'll be talking to a Cambridge historian about the level of accuracy that there is in that movie. You may see from my face that the level is not particularly high. We're going to be sampling in the studio some English wines because we need to know what is the best thing to be drinking this Christmas, and it would be nice to be patriotic. So, Camilla, you might want to hang around.
Well, I could. You know, I'm teetotal, so you'll have to drink my wine for me. And then I also thought, Michael, that you had like a 12 o'clock limit and you're actually going to be imbibing before noon on a Sunday, which is probably the way ahead. Do you know what? I was going to ask you with regard to the Elgin marbles, because I know you're a very learned fellow, what you made of the King wearing that Greek tie to COP28 in Dubai, because I was quite astonished by it. You've had this row between Rishi Sunak and his Greek counterpart, obviously accusing each other of playing politics with the Elgin marbles. And then Charles III turns up in what I thought was a bit of a statement tie. And you're a man who likes statement ties and indeed jackets. So what did you think of that?
I was actually rather shocked. And I think the question I always ask is, would the late Queen have done the same? Would she have worn a scarf with the Greek flag? I think the answer to that is extremely obvious. So, to tell you the truth, I was rather shocked by the King making what I thought was a political gesture. Actually, I'm in the camp of those who wonder, you know, whether the King should really be making speeches about the environment. Because it's all very well. I mean, the environment is quite a political issue, and I'll tell you why it's political. It's political because, in the end, it's about making decisions about lots of money that British citizens are going to have to spend, for example, you know, changing their boilers. And those are not considerations that need to weigh particularly heavily on the mind of the King because he is taxpayer funded. So, you know, I just wonder about the role of the monarchy in politics at the moment.
Yes. Did you ever receive one of his famous Black Spider memos, Michael?
I, of course, am bound by secrecy as to what passed between me and the then Prince of Wales.
Well, do you know what? Let's discuss some other correspondence just while you're on the subject of royalty, because I love your take on all sorts of different matters. What did you make of the whole Harry and Meghan row this week? Because we've now got the Tory MP for the Isle of Wight, Bob Seeley, talking about legislation to strip the Sussexes of their titles. Let's not forget, these were titles that were given to them upon marriage in 2018 by the late Queen. It will require a letters patent, I think, by the King to change this arrangement. I mean, do you think they are worthy of losing their titles, Michael?
Well, first of all, let me declare my position on titles. I think titles are a bit of a nonsense. You may have noticed that I have not acquired very many myself during my career. So a fuss about titles is not one that interests me at all. I mean, it seems to me that what Meghan and Harry most enjoy in life is attention. And if there's any means of depriving them of attention, I think that's more important than depriving them of titles. Depriving them of titles would give them more attention.
And you'd have noticed in the week that the BBC sort of outed the names of the two alleged royal racists with regard to having had this concerning conversation about Archie's skin tone, according to Meghan on Oprah Winfrey. I mean, what's your impression of that? We've heard from Trevor Phillips saying, you know, he doesn't think that any discussion of what a child might look like if born to a mixed-race couple is racist. Boris Johnson even waded into it and said, this is a sort of conversation we all have, whether we're black or white, to be perfectly honest. I mean, we all discuss what a baby might look like.
Well, of course we do. I think this is absolutely absurd, and I just don't think it helps at all that, you know, if the word colour crops up in a sentence, then people immediately talk about racism. You're absolutely right. But Boris Johnson introduced us to this word antepartum, which means before birth, so antepartum discussions. And of course, in any family, they would say, I wonder whether this child is going to be red-headed or blue-eyed or black-eyed. And wondering about what mixture of characteristics will come from parents is the most natural thing in the world.
OK. Michael, thank you very much for that. We'll be up with Rosie Duffield next.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
Oh! No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox.
That's right, we want to hear from you.
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Much more to come in the next hour. Tory grandee David Davis will be giving me his thoughts shortly. We're also going to be speaking to a relative of one of the hostages who are still being held by Hamas in Gaza. All of that and more after the news with Aaron Armstrong.
And it's 10 o'clock. Very good morning to you from the GB newsroom. Let's bring you up to date with what's happening around the country in terms of the cold weather. Emergency services in Cumbria have been working to help people trapped in their cars overnight after heavy snow. Police, who declared a major incident, are urging people not to travel to the area. A large number of vehicles were abandoned on the M6, and Cumbria Police says its highway teams were verbally abused as they tried to help. A yellow weather warning for snow and ice remains in place for many parts of the UK. Senior meteorologist Jim Dale says milder conditions over the coming days could now lead to floods.
Give or take that area, sort of about a foot of snow, level snow. That if you melt that snow, which is what meteorologists do, it equates to an inch. Tomorrow we got another system coming in, another system which has got low pressure attached to it. It's quite a tight thing, so there'll be wind, but also heavyweight rain as well. Now, all that snow down, and not just Monday, but on Wednesday as well, quite heavyweight rain. So all this snow and the rain attached to it that's coming, I think we might be looking at floods at midweek again.
An extra £15 million will reportedly be given to Rwanda to take migrants who arrive in the UK illegally. That's on top of the £140 million already received. The Sunday Times says the additional funds aim to secure a treaty so the East African country also takes asylum seekers who cross the channel in small boats. It's understood the Foreign Secretary, James Cleverly, will fly to Kigali in the coming days to seal the deal. A man's died and 2 people have been injured after a knife and hammer attack in central Paris. It happened as tourists gathered near the Eiffel Tower last night. Officials have confirmed the man who died was German. A 26-year-old French national known to security services has been arrested. The UK will carry out surveillance flights over the Middle East to find hostages held by Hamas. More than 130 people are still being held captive in Gaza, where fighting's resumed following a week-long truce. The Ministry of Defence says the unarmed flights will not have a combat role. Meanwhile, Israel continues to carry out intense airstrikes in southern Gaza. The Hamas-run health ministry says 7 Palestinians have been killed and several others injured in a raid on Rafah city. The US is calling on Israel to avoid further harm to civilians in its fight against Hamas. The UK will give £100 million to vulnerable countries most affected by climate change. It will provide nations with early warning systems for extreme weather and will help tackle food and water shortages and a rise in infectious diseases. The government says global warming pushes 26 million people into poverty every year. International Development Minister Andrew Mitchell will announce the plans at the COP28 Climate Summit in Dubai later. And that is it for the moment. We are live across the UK on TV, digital radio. And if you want us on your smart speaker, just say play GB News. Now it's over to Camilla.
Thank you, Aaron. Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. Lots more still to come. In a minute, I'm going to be joined by Tory MP David Davis. I'll be speaking to a relative of one of the Israeli hostages still trapped in Gaza. And Labour MP Rosie Duffield is going to join me to discuss her party's plans to deselect her. I'm also going to be speaking to my former boss, the former editor of the Sunday Express, Martin Townsend, who's going to discuss the royal row that has engulfed the country, seemingly, since the release of Omid Scobie's new book. And I'm going to be joined, this is a fascinating story, stay tuned for this a little later, by a chaplain who was sacked from his job at a school and referred to the anti-terror scheme PREVENT for, guess what, questioning trans ideology. But before that, let's bring David Davis into the conversation. He's the Conservative MP for Halton, Price and Howden. He's a former Cabinet Minister. You're giggling away at the fact that I've got this guest on who's been referred to prevent for questioning trans ideology. We'll get on to that later. First of all, lovely to see you this morning, David. Thank you for your time, as ever. Can we discuss this bid by the UAE to take control of the Telegraph? What's your reaction to it?
Well, I wrote to the Secretary of State some time ago, asking her to do what she's actually done, which is to call it in to, I think it's called a public interest notification, because I just think it's wrong. I mean, we shouldn't normally, in my view, allow people who are outside the reach of our country to own major newspapers. The Telegraph is one of the most important newspapers in the country. It has massive influence both at elections, in people's general view, and indeed when there are Tory party leadership contests, as may happen in the next few years, then they have a massive influence there too. Why should we give that power to the Emirates, in this case, Vice President of the Emirates, a country which in the past has not exactly treated press freedom with any sort of respect? It's done the opposite. I think you pointed out in your articles that its attitude to women as well. So there are all sorts of areas where it clashes with what I would think of as the national interest.
I'm going to read a point from them in just a moment with regard to them sort of denying that they would suppress freedom of the press. But before I do, Ofcom will obviously investigate this, but it's for the government, ultimately, Lucy Fraser, and I guess Rishi Sunak, to stop it. Should the government stop it, basically? David, is the straight question I'm asking you.
Yes. Yes, in my view, absolutely. And the argument, the other argument I'll give you is this. Some time ago, we allowed Rupert Murdoch to buy the Times, right, and the Sunday Times. And at that time, there were conditions put upon it. And those conditions were broken, and there was nothing we could do about it. I mean, we were told that the editor of the Times would be independent. Eventually, one of them got sacked, and we could do nothing about it. And the same would apply with the Emirates, frankly. Okay. We could do nothing to protect it.
Let me just read this statement from Redbird IMI. Any transfer of ownership will, of course, be subject to regulatory review, and we will continue to cooperate fully with the government and the regulator. Redbird IMI are entirely committed to maintaining the existing editorial team of The Telegraph and Spectator publications, and believe that editorial independence for these titles is essential to protecting their reputation and credibility. We should also point out that Paul Marshall, one of the people bidding for the title, is a major investor in GB News. Let's move on to the next story as we're thinking about Gulf states.
Before you do, just one point there. Originally they were just going to lend them the money.
Yeah.
And then they made it a convertible, and it's going to be converted. That, in other words, they're going to take equity. They are going to take control. So if ever you get them on your programme, do ask them, if they really mean what they say, why are they taking control?
Yeah, OK. Noted. Thank you, David. Let's move on to other matters, albeit Gulf-related. COP28, is it just a load of hot air? I was surprised to see Rishi Sunak, Lord Cameron and indeed the King all fly there in separate private jets.
Well, I'm not going to get into their private...
well, come on. I mean, it just makes a mockery of it, doesn't it?
I don't think any of the people involved in green politics at the top level are particularly careful about the way they use private jets, and that's whether it's prime ministers, kings, or indeed actors and actresses who want to make some sort of coverage out of it. So what was good about it was there was some of the countries, at least a significant number, are now seeming to take nuclear power seriously. I mean, it's one of the few routes that actually gives us some chance of defeating this problem. We're also seeing the British government doing more about dealing with the consequences. I've long thought that our attempts to deal with the increase in temperature are likely to fail. I mean, for all sorts of reasons, scientific and political. But actually dealing with the floods, dealing with the poverty, dealing with those things is a direct way we can do something about it with a decent chance of success.
Yes.
This time, for the first time, we actually seem to be engaged on that. So actually, I approve of that. I think, despite the fact it's in the Middle East, which is an odd place to have a climate conference, nevertheless, given mostly oil and gas comes from that, the simple truth is they are at last focusing on things that matter. Just as, to be honest, Rishi's recent commentary on and decisions on green matters, which was taken as denying net zero. No, it's not. It's making net zero achievable for ordinary people.
Yes.
We aren't all billionaires. We can't all afford vast sums of money. And he's actually doing something towards that end. So I actually think it's been quite a good couple of months for the green agenda.
David, just a quick word on the King's tie. He's wearing Greek flags on his tie during a row over the Elgin marbles. Is he being too political there, briefly?
I think he's been spectacularly unwise.
Right.
The truth is the king has obviously got views on many things. We know that. But the truth is, being king, you have to curb those views. You have the option of making your views known to the Prime Minister once a week personally. That's something nobody else has.
Yeah.
You don't need to start flashing ties or other views or whilst you're doing it. It's an abuse of the position, I'm afraid, and you shouldn't be doing it.
David, I've got 90 seconds left with you, and I need to ask you, as Shadow Home Secretary, about some of these shambolic, former Shadow Home Secretary, I should add. Some of these I was going to say, I promoted you to the other side. It's not that bad for the Tories, surely. But briefly, we've seen this shambolic display by the head of the Home Office saying they don't know where 17,000 asylum seekers are who have withdrawn their applications. Lee Anderson also questioned them. They didn't have any of the figures. Is the Home Office fit for purpose, David?
Well, many years ago, John Reid said no.
Yeah.
And at the time, I didn't really agree with him because actually there was somebody there, the Perm Sec there was really very good. But when I've spoken to past Permanent Secretaries, they all agree that the Conservative ministers have actually been let down by their civil servants. It's not just this. Remember before we had this issue of only 1.5 asylum seekers a week being dealt with by the caseworkers. Again, that's a civil service failure. There's a whole series of indicators, I'm afraid, that says to me that the Home Office needs some pretty sizable reform at the staff level. Making people turn up to work, making people do their job properly, making people deliver, making people know their job. You don't turn up. As a minister, I would never have turned up to a select committee not knowing the answers to the obvious questions. And heavens above, this was an obvious question.
Yeah, wasn't it just? Very, very, very quick word, finally, on Boris at the COVID inquiry next week. Will you be watching it with your popcorn at the ready, David?
I'll be watching extracts of it. I'm afraid I view this as the most expensive reality TV show on television. £100 million to hear a King's Counsellor show off. Frankly, I said back in 2021 we need 2 inquiries, a scientific one to find out what the proper answer was, and then when we've done that, we can say who's to blame. What we're doing at the moment is nothing more than the sort of Dominic Cummings, Boris Johnson
blame game, David.
Show. We don't want that. We don't want that.
David Davis, you're on fiery form this morning, always in good fettle. Lovely to speak to you. Thank you very, very much for joining me.
A pleasure.
Take care. Now, let's bring Ilay David into the conversation. He's the brother of 22-year-old Aviatar David. He was kidnapped by Hamas and then filmed in captivity by Hamas inside Gaza in a video they later broadcast. Are you there with me, Ilay? Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Look, thank you so much for your time. This must be... I can't actually even begin to imagine what you and your family are going through. On one hand, you must feel a lot of joy for the hostages that are being released, but you must be thinking, when on earth am I going to see my brother again?
Yeah, of course. The emotions are mixed, very hard. We are, of course, so happy for each hostage that is coming home, especially the kids and the women.
Yeah.
But we also know that my brother is still there, and there are horrifying conditions where he's being held at. And we're just keep doing what we can to bring him back sooner.
Tell me what the last contact was that you had with him.
Well, we had contact with him via WhatsApp in the October 7th. Actually, the last message from him was at 7:40 a.m. And after that, he disappeared. His cell phone was disconnected. His friends would not answer anymore. But we got lucky. He was kidnapped, and his friends, two of his friends, best friends, were murdered.
Yeah.
And we discovered the videos by noon. It was about 2 p.m.
Yeah.
We saw him in propaganda video.
I was going to say, I mean, you see the videos and you're thinking to yourself, thank goodness he's still alive. But obviously you're also thinking, what on earth is happening to him? Is there any way, are you getting told by the Israeli authorities where he is or what might be going on? Do you know anything about who he might be held captive with, whether he's got adequate access to food and water? What have they told you about his conditions?
Well, we actually know very little. And also the officials that came to us and told us what's going on, they have no information, really exact information and specific information about my brother. They have actually more like intelligence, normal evaluation about his situation and the other hostages' situation. We actually think that Hamas is keeping them very good underground. I mean, in a way that we cannot know what is going on down there.
No. How are you operating on a sort of day-to-day basis? Like, are you guys and the family, are you sleeping, are you eating, you having nightmares? I mean, because I think people should understand, sometimes in this country, around the world, this is reported and people see the numbers and maybe they don't understand the personal cost at the heart of all of this for families like yours.
Yeah, that's right. Me and others, many other families, our loved ones just went to celebrate in a peace festival, and the only crime they committed was celebrating. And their punishment is being held by murderous people underground for almost 60 days now. And we as families, I can talk only for myself. I'm having nightmares. I barely eat. I actually forget to eat. But we try to do anything we can, really. Traveling around the world and talking to officials and interviewing. And that's something that keeps us going on. And we have to keep living and do whatever we can.
I mean, I was on the March Against Anti-Semitism last week in London, and obviously that chant of bring them home resonates with anybody. Tell me just a little bit before you go about what Evyatar is actually like. Who is this brother of yours? What's he like? What's his character like? How do you think he's going to be coping with this horrendous situation that he faces?
Well, my brother is a young man. He's 22. He's a gentle and sensitive boy. He's such a loving brother and a loving son to my parents. And he's a musician, actually. He plays the guitar, I play the piano, we play together on a weekly basis. But I also know that he's very strong and resilient, and he has such a calm mindset. And I hope that will help him to stay patient and brave. And I also hope that he tries to help the people around him.
Yeah, Ile, look, I hope that it helps for you to know that there are certainly people in Britain, a lot of people in Britain who are thinking about you, thinking about your family and this awful situation that you face. And I just wish you, your parents and, of course, your brother all the very best and hope that you can bring him home. Thank you for joining me, because I know it's a very, very difficult time for you. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. If you've been moved by that item, as I have been, you can find out more about the plight of the hostages via the Miriam Institute. That's MIRYAM. Anyone wishing to assist with the cause of Ilay should contact the Miriam Institute at www.miriaminstitute.org. Coming up, I'm going to be speaking to the Labour MP, Rosie Duffield, who's been threatened with deselection. All that and more to come in just a moment.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie. Second best. You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affect us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
There's only 3 people you can trust in life. Your doctor, your lawyer, and your nana.
I'm not sure.
So join me, Nana Aquare, at 3 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday, where we discuss the biggest topics of the weekend. Be ready for battle. Could you be quiet? What is this?
It's my new teeth.
It's your new teeth. I don't bite. Well, not without a good reason. Always honest, always fun. Every weekend at 3 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this? Are you rethinking this policy? Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality.
On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. In just a moment, I'm going to be speaking to my old boss, the former editor of the Sunday Express, Martin Townsend, about the latest on Harry and Meghan. But first, let's bring Rosie Duffield into the conversation now. She's the Labour MP for Canterbury. Hello, Rosie. Look, I'm grateful for you speaking to me because you've not spoken to anybody, any journalist, since this bizarre situation that you found yourself in with regard to your alleged anti-Semitism. Let's just talk the audience through this story. Graham Linehan, who is the creator of Father Ted, tweeted the following in response to a story about Eddie Izzard, in which Eddie Izzard was quoted saying, "I'm a trans superhero, but if I'd lived in Nazi Germany, I'd have been murdered for it." Graham Linehan just captured that quote and said, "Ah, yes, the Nazis, famously bigoted against straight white men with blonde hair." You liked that tweet initially. That was March the 22nd, 2023. But then 3 days later, you unliked it.
Yeah.
And why did you unlike it?
I think there was already a load of pile-ons by people like Ash Sarkar, the usual suspects who pile on me all the time on
Media
Twitter.
reporter.
Yeah, and I just thought this is attracting too much stuff.
Sure.
And it's been really misconstrued, so I'll unlike it to be, you know, not controversial.
Then after you unlike it, you get contacted by your whip, the Labour MP Chris Elmore, who tells you to unlike it. You say you have unliked it.
Yeah.
The next thing you know, you're being threatened with deselection.
Not quite.
Right.
I mean, the whole sort of disciplinary... At the time, my whip, who was really lovely, was just saying there was controversy going on and that people had started to complain about it. And, you know, poor chap, he's lovely, but he's just the messenger. He was just saying, look, you need to know what's going on. And then he said this process will probably start. He didn't know what was happening. A few days later, I got sort of official notices that I was being investigated and there was a disciplinary. But it's not for a while that you know what the charges are. And then I got sort of the charge sheet and anti-Semitism, and I just sort of thought it was a bit of a joke.
I mean, let's be devil's advocate. You could say that, I suppose, equating the trans movement in any way to sort of the Holocaust or indeed mentioning Nazis, it is unsavoury. The Jewish community don't like it because they say that it kind of lessens the impact of what happened during the Holocaust. So we can understand that. We could even say perhaps that Linehan has been misjudged. We can see also what he's trying to say here. He's saying, come on, Eddie, you're not a victim of persecution just because you're trans.
Graham Linehan is a satirist. You know, I used to write satire before I got to be an MP, and I recognised that he was taking the pee out of someone who essentially is in the privileged position of being the very person that the Nazis described as being an ideal, a tall, blonde, straight, white man. And I thought that there was so much irony there.
Although he claims that he wants to be called she at times, but he is still male.
Trans person. But, you know, we didn't use that language, and the Nazis certainly didn't use that language. And I thought it was really, really tasteless to put himself in a situation where Jews and gay people and Roma travellers were and the disabled were persecuted, and he doesn't come into those categories as far as I'm aware.
I mean, the anti-Semitism charge is particularly interesting in your case because you've been a vocal supporter of Jews. In fact, the Jewish Chronicle's editor, Stephen Pollard, said this about you. As editor of the Jewish Chronicle, I spent years after Corbyn became Labour leader fighting the party's anti-Semitism. Most Labour MPs were either complicit in it or said nothing to upset party members. Rosie Duffield was one of the very few who refused to be cowed by the party's Jew haters. Now, it strikes me, I don't know how you feel. You've made an enemy of the left because you've been anti-Corbyn. You've made an enemy of the left because you have questioned trans ideology. So is your suspicion that you're just being forced out of the party in any...
I suspect that it isn't about anti-Semitism because anyone just has to Google me and realise that my record on that is exemplary. And I've never had an apology for the kind of 3 or 4 years of absolute hatred I received from the left wing of the party for standing up against anti-Semitism. It was horrendous. There were female MPs mostly that were deselected that found that they couldn't carry on. It was so awful. I'm not Jewish, so it wasn't as bad for me. But I got so much abuse for standing up for my Jewish colleagues. And
but
I've never had any
recently
kind of apology or understanding about that.
No, standing up for women. I mean, I asked you the last time I interviewed you, which was quite months ago, have you had a conversation with Keir Starmer about it?
Absolutely not, no. We last spoke in September 2021.
2021?
Yeah, just before our conference. There was a big controversy about me liking a tweet again about women not having... Only women had cervixes or something. And no, we haven't had a conversation.
So what's your analysis of Starmer in this whole situation? You know, you haven't been supported on your views trying to stand up for women in the face of what you claim is sort of quite extreme trans activism, because I know you've had a lot of problems on social media. Now there's this talk of deselecting you because you're, quotes, anti-Semitic. He must know, if he's led the charge against anti-Semites in the Labour Party, who's on his side and who isn't.
You would have thought so. And we had a recent controversial vote, and I didn't break the whip on that issue because, you know, I was broadly supportive of the leadership. So it is a bit strange. I mean, he would say, if you were to ask him, that he couldn't get involved in disciplinary matters and that he couldn't sort of interrupt this system. But it goes to the NEC, our National Executive Committee, who are overall in charge of deciding what happens to MPs under this selection. And some of the people that complain about me constantly have representatives on that NEC. So the LGBT Labour group, who absolutely hate me and want me to be thrown out.
I mean, are you
influential? Very influential.
Are you genuinely sort of afraid you're going to be turfed out of the Labour Party?
I hope not. But the ultimate destination of any disciplinary process could be that an MP is, you know, removed from the whip.
So, what's your message to Starmer on this?
It would be really nice to have some support at some point. It really, really would be nice to have a conversation to understand what he thinks about all of this and to understand if he's going to support women more vocally, who now, in my case, I line up with the party's change of policy. So I don't really understand what I'm supposed to have done so wrong. I mean, that wasn't an anti-Semitic tweet and I withdrew my like in case it offended anyone, but all of my Jewish friends, and the reason I think this probably got out, this story, is because I've had to, as part of the case that's been going on for 9 months, I've had to approach people to give me statements, Jewish friends and allies in the Lords, in the Commons and in bodies like the Board of Deputies, to write a statement supporting me and to say that I'm not anti-Semitic. So I suspect that's where this story came from.
What confuses me about it is we've got Keir Starmer on the front of the Sunday Telegraph today and inside writing an op-ed where he's channeling his inner Margaret Thatcher.
Yeah, that was a surprise.
Well, what's your reaction to that?
I've already had a few emails. I've got old mining villages in my part of Kent and it's not going down too well so far. So, so I mean, I need to read the article properly because I'm sure it wasn't just about...
Well, it was basically saying, I can summarise it for you because I read it this morning, you know, we can sort out Brexit and we can sort out immigration and actually, you know, the aspiration that Thatcher brought in the early 80s is something that we should emulate because the country's going to hell in a handcart, a little bit like the winter of discontent, and I'm the man to save it.
OK, well, I guess that's a good message broadly, but I think...
But the Thatcher thing isn't going to go down well with the left.
He said it without mentioning that particular
But why do you think
person.
he's mentioning Thatcher?
I don't know. I'd have to ask him. But, I mean, I guess it is the aspirational, maybe the white van man sort of the past. Perhaps that's what he's talking about, home ownership and things like that. But there are people who are already not impressed who have emailed me, so...
I mean, do you have confidence in his leadership? I ask you because... From a personal perspective, you've not spoken to this guy since 2021, and I think of all Labour MPs, you have had a particularly rough ride with the opposition you've had from the trans movement and indeed now with this.
Yeah, I mean, it would be nice to know that he's got the back of MPs who have this kind of thing. It's not nice. We get a lot of abuse. Women get a lot of abuse. We're getting a lot of abuse over the Middle East crisis on either side.
Yes.
So it would be nice to feel that we're more sort of a together group that he feels that he's maybe supporting a bit more broadly.
You mentioned earlier about, you know, being almost cancelled for retweeting about the fact that men can't have cervixes.
Yeah.
Are we confident that Starmer now knows whether or not a woman can have a penis or not?
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, the fact that the party came out with a policy in the summer of saying that we don't support self-ID...
Yes.
That was a good sign. I still haven't had anyone talking to me about that in the party. I don't know how they get to the policy decisions, but nobody's spoken to me about that. So I guess we're going in the right direction on that.
And is there a timeline on what might happen in this particular case for you?
I have no idea. I mean, the discipline list, the list of MPs who are being disciplined, most of them, as everyone will know, there's some sort of cloud about possible sexual harassment or, you know, sometimes racism or things that they shouldn't have said in public. And most of them that I know have been given some kind of broad timeline. With my own particular process, I haven't been given a timeline.
Why is that?
8 months. I've no idea. It's a process that I've never come across in any other organisation, and it's kind of supposed to be independent and transparent, and it's neither of those things.
Do you have any idea, like, who is leading this against you? I mean, without necessarily naming...
Yeah, I mean, I've seen screenshots of particular Labour-affiliated societies organising against
Labour societies like whom?
LGBT Labour.
Ah.
I'm not saying they're behind this particular thing, maybe, but they certainly organise against me.
And anyone within the leadership or the Lotto leader's office?
There's a big sort of crossover between staff in Keir's office, staff, you know, people on the NEC, people who are in LGBT Labour. They all kind of know each other. They're all sort of London-based, and they all possibly don't necessarily like me. I don't know.
Has being a Labour MP lived up to the expectation for you?
I came here to do a job. I came to Westminster to do a job to represent my constituents, to fight against things like the two-child limit that I'm really opposed, to fight back in the day against Brexit because my constituency is so close to Europe and our take on it is so different to lots of the other cities in the UK. I didn't come here to be distracted by these internal rows constantly, and it's really disappointing, actually.
Rosie Duffield, thank you very much indeed for sharing your story this morning. Labour Party might want to take note of that interview. Now, another row has engulfed the royal family this week after a Dutch version of Omid Scobie's new book, Endgame, named the two alleged royal racists who supposedly discussed Prince Archie's skin colour before he was born. I'll be discussing it all with the former editor of the Sunday Express, my former boss, Martin Townsend, in just a minute. Don't go anywhere.
Who is it? We're here for the show.
Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Good afternoon, Britain.
Good afternoon, Britain. Join us, Tom and Emily,
To find out what's happening in the heart of Westminster.
and why it matters to you.
Weekdays from midday, we bring you the most compelling stories from across the United Kingdom.
And from your doorstep to our inbox,
That's right, we want to hear from you,
GB News.
Britain's news channel.
I think the most exciting bit for me is talking to people.
People who I think are ignored often by the major news channels. We're going to give news they want to hear. There's a voice there that needs to be heard. I think there's a chance here for a diversity of opinion to be expressed, which you don't find elsewhere. It's really exciting.
We don't hold back. We're free to say how decisions that are taken here
affects us all around the country. Only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Michelle Dewberry, and I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'd much rather hear what you have to say. So send in your opinions to gbviews@gbnews.com. Keep them clean, and you never know, I might read them out. With my panel here on Jubes & Co, we debate, we get stuck into the issues of the day on a show where all views are welcome, especially yours. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
In the GB Newsroom, we bring you the news as it happens. With our team of dedicated journalists across the UK, we're ready to give you accurate reporting every day. When the news breaks, we'll be there with bulletins on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Your weekend starts here with Friday Night Live with me, Mark Dolan, 8 till 9 on GB News. Big stories, big guests and big laughs as we get you ready for a cracking weekend. That's Friday Night Live with Mark Dolan. Fridays 8 till 9 on GB News. Bring your own drinks. The admission's free.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening, and you should too.
Tired of the usual focus-tested, pre-prepared Westminster runaround? Well, so am I.
So you want higher taxes?
Is your department to blame for this?
Are you rethinking this policy?
Every Sunday at 9:30, I'll be sitting down with those in power to get the truth about the issues affecting you.
Let's be honest, we've known about the cost pressures of this project for years, not months.
That's the Camilla Tominey Show, a politics show with personality. On GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to the Camilla Tominey Show. In just a moment, I'm going to be joined by Reverend Dr. Bernard Randall, who was referred to prevent prevent people from questioning trans ideology. But before that, let's bring Martin Townsend, former editor of the Sunday Express, my former boss, into the conversation. I love saying, yeah, you find it funny that I say that, but I just like to put you into context. Let's talk about Endgame, Omid Scobie's expose.
Marvellous,
Now, obviously, you'll be familiar with the story of the names of the alleged royal racists ending up in the Dutch book. Scobie says it was lost in translation.
Yes.
Seemingly, it was found in translation. Funny that. What's your general impression of the idea that the King and indeed the Princess of Wales may be racist for having a conversation about the skin tone of Archie?
I just think that's complete nonsense. I think everybody has these conversations about... You know, my daughter was born with brown eyes, we've all got blue eyes, we were all discussing that for ages and ages. Whatever the baby is, whoever the baby is, you have those discussions.
But then say that's our understanding now, and at the time, I think Meghan used the word concerns about what that would look like.
Yeah.
And we're saying, well, it wasn't concern about what it would look like, it was just curiosity.
Yes.
But will that hold into the future, you know, in 20, 30 years' time? Will young people be reflecting on the King and indeed his daughter-in-law, or both daughter-in-laws, and seeing it in the same light, do you think?
Well, see, this is the danger, isn't it? And I think this is why this is serious, because, you know, these days we know that an innocent remark like that, which most of us would just have in everyday life about a newborn baby, you know, what's the baby going to look like? I mean, my granddad was very dark-skinned, or he was like, you know... It's one of those things you just talk about all the time. Well, not all the time, but, you know, at certain moments. When someone's pregnant.
Yeah.
But, of course, these days, the word racism is bandied around left, right and centre. Everybody and everything is racist. The countryside's racist, you know, the animals are racist.
Hang on a minute. The couple rode back from this in what I thought was a massive example of global gaslighting.
Yes.
They said, no, we never intended to suggest they were racist. We were just talking about unconscious bias.
Yes.
Therefore, lowering the threshold by which their nearest and dearest could be found guilty.
Well, yes, unconscious bias that then leads to social engineering. So you're not unconscious bias.
No, indeed.
I mean, no, I get that. I get that they rode back on that. But the fact of the matter is that word is used. That word is used, actually, that in Omid Scobie's book, I think on page 9 or something, he says there had been racist allegations against the royal family without being specific at that point.
What do you make of Bob Seeley, the MP for the Isle of Wight, talking about now stripping the couple of their titles?
The only thing I'd say about that is I don't think that... I mean, I think that's very possible. That's a possible route it could go down. But then, of course, Meghan is still Princess Meghan. And she actually quite likes being Princess Meghan.
Also, doesn't it make victims of them all over again?
Absolutely, yeah. Which is the other problem. We don't want to make martyrs of this couple. So, you know, I do wonder about that. I can completely see why he's asked for it, and I was expecting that to happen. But I do wonder whether it's the right way to go, frankly.
I mean, you've been a newspaper editor and indeed editor of OK magazine, so you've seen it from one side, the press coverage, but you're also now a PR man. So let's talk about the PR. First of all, I mean, are the royals emerging OK from all this? They've adopted the never complain, never explain mantra of the late Queen. There's talk about them suing. Should they sue? Should they comment? Should they release a statement? What do you reckon?
Well, I mean, as I said earlier, I do think essentially they are being labelled as racist. Whether, you know, that's now the way a lot of the public...
But William said at the time, we are very much not a racist family.
Yes, he did. He made that point.
Is that enough?
Well, I mean, you know, and here it comes again. It's in the book. It's been all over the newspapers. I mean, it does look bad for them, even though I don't personally think it is racist in any way, shape or form. And it's because racism is now such a loaded word. They would be within their rights to sue over it, definitely.
But then doesn't it just fuel the fire?
Yeah, well, and, you know, while it would be within their rights, I wouldn't advise them to do so. However, what I do think has happened, and I do think this is a tragedy for Harry, is that door on a reconciliation is completely slammed shut. I think you could take away their titles, they could be sued or whatever, which I don't think they would be. I don't think the royal family would take that action. But the fact is that the real problem for Harry is he was trying to reconcile with Charles. He rang him, he showed him pictures of the family and everything else. And suddenly, this information, which clearly, you know, Omid Scobie had in his notebook for years and years. Because if you go to a publisher with a book like Finding Freedom, the first book, the first thing the publisher is going to say is, have you got 2 books? Because if they think the first one is going to be really, you know, fantastic, then they're going to ask... have you got enough material for 2 books? He was familiar with all of Meghan's close associates, presumably had conversations with them all. I expect he's got notebooks full of stuff.
Well, also a court case heard that former head of communications Jason Knauf had email exchanges with Meghan about the book and its content.
Well,
so we know that they collaborated with the first book.
Yeah.
We've heard nothing from them. Should they release a statement? Should the Sussexes address this and say, if it's the truth, we didn't have anything to do with this book. You know, this bloke's just come out with all this.
Well, that's what I think they're weighing up in their minds at the moment, because I think this has taken them by surprise, or certainly that level of information in that book has taken them by surprise. And there's no doubt in my mind that this is basically a publicity stunt. This is how to get sales for the book. This is nothing that's happened has happened by accident. The words didn't jump into a book and jump back out again. You know, they were included in the transcript. Somebody. I think somebody somewhere thought, put it in, take it out, and you sort of had this whole...
Well, I wondered whether an early version might have gone to the Dutch, because apparently they like to get their English translation out early, because the Dutch speak English to such a great extent that they sometimes just buy the book in English.
Yeah.
So the Dutch want their copy out there as soon as possible.
Pre-legaled, perhaps, yeah.
Maybe. I mean, who knows? But I just can't understand how it could have been translated in.
But I do think I think this will have been a shock for Harry, and I think he was making moves towards some sort of reconciliation, and I do think that door is now slammed shut.
Final question, really briefly. Sussex's reputations right now? I mean, they've not been enhanced by this.
I mean, you know, the Sussex are now seen as being kind of, if you like, in cahoots with Omid Scobie, who is operating, I would say, about 2 or 3 tiers below those tabloid newspapers like The Sun and The Sun and the Mail, that Harry himself complained about in the book Spare. You know, he is now in... There's a huge irony here.
Yeah.
You know, this is behaviour that you wouldn't find in tabloid. You know,
I know.
We've seen the kind of nervousness that papers had here about even printing the name. So,
yeah. Funny thing about papers is they offer a right of reply.
Well, indeed.
Thank you very much, Martin Townsend, for joining me this morning.
Pleasure.
Reverend Dr Bernard Randall joins me now. He's a chaplain who was sacked from his job at Trent College. We have sort of talked about it, Reverend, but let's just go into the details of this, because you're now suing Trent College and indeed its headmaster. Just explain briefly why.
Goodness, it's such a long story. Well, I was the school chaplain. Long story short, I gave a sermon in the chapel saying that pupils didn't have to agree with everything that LGBT plus activists say. They make up their own minds. They may hold to traditional Christian understandings, or they can accept all the LGBT stuff, and that would be fine too.
Yeah.
For that, I was initially sacked, later reinstated on appeal, but with a list of 20 conditions, including censorship of all sermons, not allowed to mention anywhere around the school anything that might upset or offend anyone. I was also reported to Prevent, the anti-terror scheme. I was reported to the local authority safeguarding officers and the church safeguarding officials. So I was accused of being a terrorist and a child abuser.
Right.
For giving a sermon which simply set out you may accept different viewpoints.
I mean, OK, and I accept that that's your intention with that sermon. Can you imagine if you are a child listening to it who might be gay, who might be trans, and then they might reflect, look, you know, the church isn't as inclusive as it seems. This reverend is speaking to me saying that what I believe might not hold water with others. That puts me in a really awkward position. You might have made children feel bad about themselves.
Well, except that they're in the same position as, say, a Muslim or Hindu child, of which there were those in the school, or indeed an atheist. Part of the point of a chapel is to present the Christian understanding, but part of what I also wanted to do was to say, you know, I'm Christian wholeheartedly, and that allows you to be wholeheartedly whatever your belief system is. So if we say you cannot challenge someone's beliefs in an educational context, what is the point of education?
Yes.
So, yes, of course, there's a certain sensitivity there, and I fully understand that. But the response should be not sack the chaplain who might possibly have upset someone, rather work with that upset and say, OK, on balance, is there a way to have a conversation about this? Can we deal with this in a way that gives you resilience for the future? Because if these children spend their whole lives being told, if you're upset, that's a terrible thing, they will grow into adulthood as very fragile adults. But if they are taken and told, OK, you're upset, let's explore that, but aren't Christians allowed to have their views just as you're allowed your views?
Yes.
Let's work with it. Then they develop resilience and they go through life as happy adults. And that's actually what we're aiming for.
Do you know whether anyone actually complained about the sermon? I mean, how did it suddenly... This happened in 2019, by the way. You've been helped by a group called Christian Concern.
That's right, who have been fantastic.
But did people complain? Were there a flurry of complaints? Let's just pick out one line that kind of summarises what your view was. You're entitled, if you wish, you told the children, to look at some of the claims made about gender identity and think that it is incoherent to say, for example, that gender is quite independent of any biological factor, but that a person's physiology should be changed to match his or her claimed gender. I mean, that probably is quite difficult for people who might be confused about their gender and indeed their sexual orientation. But who complained?
Well, mostly members of staff.
Right.
Who expressed concern on behalf of people who might have been upset, which is what we so often see with these email campaigns. I'm not upset, but someone else might be.
Yeah.
There was one pupil who said, and it's an anonymous email, I think it's a she, who said that she was upset and her beliefs were challenged. And she's entitled to those beliefs, absolutely, of course she is. But she's not, I would suggest, entitled to say no one must challenge my beliefs.
I mean, do you think this is a result of, you know, transgender ideology sort of taking precedence over other ideologies? Is it also a result of an increased amount of secularism in society in general, that you think that Christian views are being forced out of school teachings?
I think it's a combination of both of those things. I think society has become more, on the face of it, secular. Traditional religion has declined, and in its place has rushed in all sorts of other ideas.
Yeah.
And the trans and queer ideology, that's the bit that I have a problem with. I don't mind people being gay or lesbian, and they must make up their own minds about how to live
Just
their
to
lives.
qualify on that, queer, you're using the word queer because that is now how some people who identify, it previously was used curiously as a slur for
Absolutely,
homosexuals.
which is a very odd
You're
thing.
putting it
And
in
I'm
the new
using
context of LGBTQ plus.
It's the TQ plus
Yes,
and
I understand.
queer theory, capital Q,
Yes,
capital T.
understood.
Yes.
Do you feel then that, I mean, the prevent referral is odd. I think it would strike anybody listening or watching this to be odd. Then this referral to DBS, indeed for safeguarding, could stop you from ever working with children again. I mean,
That's right.
is your view that that's just over the top, it's vindictive, it doesn't really reflect crime
It
here?
feels absolutely vindictive, because, as I say, I was reinstated on appeal with all these conditions, and then I was made redundant during COVID. And I feel that was just an excuse to get rid of someone who was too religious. Be that as it may, I was employed by the school for 18 months after the sermon, and I was fine to work with children. When the Employment Tribunal judgment came out, which we lost, and that's under appeal, and everybody was surprised, I think, at the result, then the head teacher decided to refer me to the Teaching Regulation Agency Disclosure and Barring Service to try and get me banned from ever teaching, ever working with children, which would include in a church.
What effect would that have on you, Rev? I mean, do you consider yourself a risk to children? That's the suggestion here.
Well, absolutely not. And,
No.
and it's worth saying that, you know, I've got documentary evidence of people saying there is no suggestion that Reverend Randall has ever acted inappropriately towards anyone. So that is admitted. It's all about the sermon. It's all about the beliefs.
Looking back at the sermon now, and when you reread it, would you still deliver that sermon again? With the benefit of hindsight, would you have toned it down a bit? Do you stand by it 100%?
Well, I stand by the ideas 100%. Would I rephrase a few bits? Possibly I would, but I'm not sure I would particularly tone it down. But there are a few phrases I might go, oh, yeah, I could have said that a little bit better. That's always going to be the case. But the core ideas, children deserve to be encouraged to think. That is what education is supposed to be for. And I don't want to dumb down and treat them as if they're incapable of thinking for themselves, because I treat them as human beings, and human beings can think. They're not babies, and they're not unable to...
Although there could be an
their own lives
argument,
out.
was it too much of an adult sermon for a child audience?
I don't think so. I mean, people can read it for themselves and make up their own mind. But I think that part of what educators should do is challenge and raise the bar and say, come up and meet me at this interesting place. And some children will be straight on it and others will take time. But my sermons were always at that sort of, I'm going to challenge you a bit. sort of level. And I didn't have people complaining about that until this sermon. So I think it's the topic of the sermon, not the style, that's really the issue.
Reverend Randall, thank you very much for sharing your story this morning.
Thanks for having me.
I do need to read out a comment in response by Trent College. It's previously responded to the dispute with Reverend Dr. Randall by stating that it is, and I quote, an inclusive community where we are proud of our commitment to support the well-being of everyone. We want every single pupil to be safe and feel understood here. The school is defending the claims. Now, that's all for me today. What a jam-packed show we had. Stay warm. It is a little chilly outside. I'm going to be back next week at 9:30, and you heard from Michael Portillo. He's got a great show up next, so stay tuned for that.
A brighter outlook with Box Solar, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Hello, welcome to your latest GB News weather. I'm Ellie Glazier. A much cloudier start compared to what we've seen recently across the southern half of the UK today, but further north, still a very cold and frosty start this morning. Low pressure still very much in charge, sitting out to the southwest, with various occlusions running their way eastwards across much of the UK through this afternoon. This will bring bands of rain and cloud and some showery rain as well across parts of England and Wales. Again, perhaps turning wintry over the hills of North Wales, parts of the Midlands and Northern England as well. But for Northern Ireland, Scotland definitely seeing the best of the sunshine this afternoon. Still feeling cold despite that sunshine, parts of Scotland perhaps staying below zero, but under all that cloud and rain, the southern half of the UK definitely milder than we've seen recently. Through Sunday evening, further rain pushes up from the southwest overnight and into the start of Monday. This is likely to turn very heavy across the southern half of the UK. Parts of England and Wales seeing those accumulations build up into the start of the new working week. Further north, though, another cold night. Under any of those clear skies, we could see a risk of ice, with temperatures widely dropping down below freezing across Scotland, northern England, but milder again across the southwest. Into the new working week, rain very much in charge across parts of England and Wales, again turning wintry across the hills of Wales, northern England, where we could see up to 10 centimetres across the Pennines. A very damp day, though, for much of the southern half of the UK. Northern Ireland and Scotland, though, seeing plenty of sunshine, with some showers pushing in along those eastern coasts, but still feeling cold here with temperatures in the low single figures.
Looks like things are heating up. Boxed boilers, sponsors of weather on GB News.
Who is it?
We're here for the show. Welcome to the Dinosaur Hour with me, John Cleese. I was married to a therapist.
And you survived?
I thought we were getting Hugh Laurie.
Second best.
You interviewed Saddam Hussein. What's that like?
I was terrified. I'm playing strip poker with you three.
No, thank you.
My CDs need to be put in alphabetical order.
Are you going to be problematic again?
The Dinosaur Hour. Sundays on GB News.
Wake up to the headlines with Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. We treat you to the day's biggest stories before anyone else, 7 days a week. You can catch up on everything you need to know before you've even had your kippers. Headliners every morning at 5 a.m. only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News, unlike other broadcasters, isn't obsessed with the London-Westminster bubble. We think there's a nation beyond the M25, and that's why we talk about the issues that matter across the land. Join me on State of the Nation, 8 to 9 o'clock, Monday to Thursday, on GB News. Daisy's listening.